this working? Can you hear me?
You're not on yet.
They cannot hear me. That might be okay. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. You know, I'm now at UC Berkeley, and we have this tradition that everything starts 10 minutes after. It's called Berkeley time. So if you haven't noticed, we've been doing Berkeley time here at the conference, mostly because of the elevators. So thanks for your patience as we get things rolling this morning. So welcome to the featured research session, An Ecological View of Equity, Reframing Our Understanding of Youth Access to Connected Learning Opportunities. So before I introduce our speaker, in addition to what I am sure will be a blockbuster talk by our keynote, I want to let you know that there will be a tribute at the last part of the session to Brother Mike, an inspirational mentor, colleague, designer, thinker, and human being, and a central figure in the DML community. I also wanted to call your attention to a session that is not on your printed schedule. It made no sense to not feature two of our most influential literacy scholars in key speaking roles in the program. Thus, at 2 o'clock today in the California Ballroom C, Ernest Morel and Glenda Hull will be presenting and engaged in a discussion on new literacies and connected learning, the not yet here. So I please invite you to consider that session. Okay, to the good stuff. When I was thinking about who to invite for the research talk at DML, I was interested in a scholar whose work resonated and was held consequential across a number of communities. Someone who was a leading scholar researcher in her own right, but equally important, a leader in the digital media world whose work has been scaled up, borrowed, sometimes without credit, and held up as a model of how to do work that changes, reframes, remixes, and challenges how we think about the possibility and potential of youth, especially youth from non-dominant communities. Who else but Professor Nichole Pinkard could help us how to understand how to design with equity at the forefront? A little bit of background on Nichole for those of you who don't know. Dr. Pinkard holds a BS in computer science from Stanford University and an MS in computer science and a PhD in learning sciences from Northwestern University. That alone should kind of make you just fan yourself. I first met Nichole when she was a graduate student. She had just developed this literacy game that would recruit young African American girls into new literacy practices. I was wowed then and continued to look to her and her work as she was always ahead of the field. Currently, Nichole is associate professor in the College of Computing and Digital Media at DePaul University in Chicago. She is founder of Digital Youth Network, a co-founder of Inquirium LLC, and Remix Learning, home of iRemix, a social learning platform that connects youth learning opportunities in school, home, and beyond, a program I'm proud to say we used in our after-school programs. In collaboration with Chicago Public Library, Dr. Pinkard helped found YOUmedia, a public learning space that immerses high school students in a context of traditional media, books, to make and produce new media artifacts like music, games, videos, and virtual worlds. Her work in Cities of Learning is changing the way we can partner with cities and grassroots organizations to bring new opportunities to youth who would otherwise be disenfranchised. Her grants and awards, and I'm not exaggerating, are far too numerous to begin to detail. She's received the AERA Jan Hawkins, an Early Career Award, the Common Sense Award, an NSF Early Career Award, and so many more that I am sorry I can't detail here. Nichole knows that I call her the IT woman. That is, she's a magnet for funding. People want to support her innovative and consequential ideas. Dr. Pinkard is the quintessential organic scholar, deeply rooted in what matters in and for communities. I am pleased to turn the program over to Dr. Pinkard.
Well, I'm afraid to talk now. I don't know. Thank you, Chris. And I have to say, I was a first-year graduate student at Northwestern, and Chris was at UCLA. And my mentor, Carol Lee, who is the mother of the co-founder of DYN. So it's important that we talk about all the connections. I think Chris and Carol were trying to make me a literacy scholar at that point in time. And Chris has always been a support and a mentor and someone I call on all the time when I need some advice and things. So thank you for inviting me to speak. And I'm really excited to be here. I'm like, which one am I going to do? Let's see. Let's do it this way. I'm really excited to be here and speak, particularly on the topic of equity by design, because I think at the core of the work that I hope to share with you today and talk about has always been the notion of equity, and that's at the center, and trying to figure out whatever we needed to design. Design professional development, design spaces, design curriculum. The it didn't matter. What mattered was whether we saw that we were having an impact on the lives of youth. So I want to, the purpose of today is to try to walk you through what it's probably been 10, 12 years. Akili and I, we go back and forth if it's 11 or 12 years now. History of what we've done, but really focusing on infrastructure and ways in which we've had to address and encounter infrastructure issues to create the ecologies that we want to see. So we can't begin but without acknowledging the tremendous village that has supported the work in funders and in collaborators. I think this list could be 3 pages long in terms of collaborators. And in funders, I've highlighted MacArthur Foundation because it's been a journey in collaboration with MacArthur from beginning. In reality, we existed before, our relationship with MacArthur existed before DML. And so we were able to sort of be in on the ground floor of this work. And then the team, this is the current team. There's actually folks in here who were once a part, or not once, or still a part of the DYN family. But here's the current team. Many of them are in the room. And can y'all quickly stand up, even if you're current and past members? Because I'm always pleased y'all here. Hopefully y'all not still asleep. Okay, thank you. I actually am always the fortunate one who gets to stand up on the stage. And a lot of people think, oh, what has Nichole done? But in reality, it's really the work of the people here and the who said the work. And as I said that, we will have a tribute at the end of the day, at the end of this session, to Brother Mike, who, along with Akili and I, were really the founders and foundation of the work of DYN, and I think really was the foundation of the DML. So as you see this talk, for those of you who know Brother Mike, you'll see his presence and you'll see his work throughout. So in spirit to Brother Mike, I am going to read a poem, and those who know me knows that that is not something I do. But this poem, when it's actually a poem, it wasn't a rap, are lyrics that Tupac that have actually stuck with me for a long time. So did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proving nature's law is wrong. It learned to walk without having feet. Funny, it seemed to be keeping its dreams. It learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else cared. And this poem is always, I revisit it because I think at the core of the work that we've always tried to do is this interplay between whether we're trying to strengthen the roads to break through the concrete or whether we're trying to get rid of the concrete. And I think our journey has gone from initially thinking we can just strengthen the individual, which I think we can, but realizing you also have to change the ecosystems, to change the system such that you can always have roses, but they don't always need to, they can actually grow out of grass. And so I'm gonna ask you some questions. Let me go back. I'm gonna ask you, because it's early in the morning, I want people engaged. There's some questions, it's like Jeopardy. They're gonna come up here and just yell them out, yell the answers out. They're gonna come quick, flash, but answer, no right answers. Just see if you can answer these. Let's go. I wish I had the Jeopardy music. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not yourself, Yagochi. Is that, are they really doing construction? Okay, this is going to be fun. Okay, so I asked that because the reality is, how many of us could answer that quickly in that time frame? How many of us can answer the number of basketball players and singers quickly? Most of us can. So that reality is a reality that our kids face every day. I'm going to try to not let that bother me. But we also know youth don't aspire to something unless they have been given an opportunity to do it or come from an environment where the job, the something, is part of the norm. We all aspire to be what is in our surroundings. So if you don't have an image or name something, how are you even attempting to be that? And so at the core of what we've tried to do in the work with DYN is to figure out how to make those somethings visible and how to make it such that kids view it as the reality for them. And so we think that all kids, all people, have decisions and choices to make, and we're always in forks in the road, and we have to decide where to go. And often what happens is, for some, there might be our infrastructures, our families, the ecosystems that we live in, make it a simple choice, this way or that way. There really aren't a million ways because your parents, your family, your schools have simplified it for you. But for many, that same choice, this is their reality. Every decision is not just one. There's millions of decisions, and there aren't the ecosystems and the people in place to help you make those choices. But we think it's possible for every kid, and particularly kids of color, to have simplified choices. But it's still going to be a path. It's not always going to be a paved road. But our goal is to figure out to make it simpler and to figure out what the ecosystem is that needs to make that happen. And so in thinking about that, one of the things I think that is really important about the DML community is that instead of just having people focus, and which I think many of us have done initially in our own space, I'm a school person, I'm an after-school person, I work in the homes, libraries, where we work in our own individual context, I think this quote is really part of the goal I think we've always strived to do, is to figure out how we're a whole ecosystem that works together. And so I can do my part, you can do your part, but unless we are able to come together and connect it, then we're not going to be able to simplify for the child. And so I stand here today, as Chris said, as a woman in computer science. The numbers are low. And if we think about African American, when I graduated in 92, I'm old, I'm 45 now. I think it was like 3.2%. And so the question I've always tried to understand is, well, how did that happen? I'm from Kansas City, Kansas. What made that happen? And I try to think about that in the design of the work we do, because oftentimes the solution might be, well, let me have people do more computer science. But if we think about it from an ecosystem standpoint, I think there's other things we can do that build the persistence that one can be prepared to go into fields where it's actually going to be problematic for them. And so for me, an example of that is, what's odd about this picture? There's 3 things odd. Let's see if y'all get the third one. Yeah. I'm tall in this one. I haven't grown since 4th grade. You see, I'm on the back row. Every other picture I take, I'm in the front row. So this is me in the 3rd grade. And this is why ecosystems matter so much. The ecosystem worked in Kansas City, Kansas. Soccer was brought in. They took the soccer information to the schools, put it in the teacher's office, in the front office. I had to take the lunch money down, saw the information about soccer. I love sports. Signed up. They called my parents, told my parents, this is soccer practice. I didn't really know what soccer was. I just knew it was a sport. I got to practice, looked on the field, and saw there was no one who looked like me. This is where mentors and parents come in important. My father said, you said you wanted to play soccer, so you're getting out the car. He left and came back at the end of practice. But I've actually said, do I really still remember this? But no, I remember the feeling of walking across that, not the court, but the field, and going like, wait, this is going to be difficult. But I got over it. Love soccer. I'm not up here because I'm a great soccer player. But I learned to deal with being different. That was one way. 3 years later, something else is different. The only girl but now is all African American basketball team. I had still learning to be different. So for me, sports was the context and the place where I learned to be comfortable being me and comfortable being in a space where I didn't have to be surrounded by those who look like me, which then makes it possible to go into Stanford and do computer science because I had already dealt and understood that. And so often, and Chris and I have talked about this, we often are in places where we're not even really aware how no one is like us because we've dealt with those and the ecosystems have created those opportunities. So in the core part of what we want to do is to help someone become a rose. We think there's, in addition to personal experiences with content, one has to be comfortable curating their own learning experiences, their own path, because the reality is you're doing something that you don't really have an image of what it is to be. You have to be able to cross boundaries to pursue interests, right? You can't say, hey, no, there aren't any women, so let me not do it. And most importantly, you have to be able to embrace failing as an unavoidable reality on the path to success. And so we've been trying for years to try to figure out how do we bring these together. And so we think our big question in the foundation and the forming of Digital Youth Network was how can we create, I'm putting connected in brackets because at the time we found that connected learning wasn't a concept, but it speaks to and it is a concept that resonates with where we were thinking at that time. So how can we create connected learning communities that afford youth equitable opportunities to develop the skills, knowledge, and dispositions necessary to succeed in tomorrow's society by working on their passions? And I say working because sometimes there's a perception that it's a passion, you don't have to work. No, you work really hard on what it is you want to do. And so it's really critical for us as students to understand that they're putting in work. And so over these 10 years, these are the questions, taking that first question, how we've narrowed in on a particular question for the context. So our work started out on the south side of Chicago with the University of Chicago charter schools, and they happened to have a one-to-one, well, they didn't happen. We created a one-to-one learning opportunity for the school, and then we had to ask the question then, well, how do we create environments where digital literacies are a valued form of social and academic capital? So just because you have a computer doesn't mean you're going to want to do something with it. So what do we have to do to create the environment? We did that for 4 or 5 years. We then were fortunate to work with our library partners. When I thought people were crazy when they said, let's go do YOUmedia, then it was like, well, how can we ensure students have a space in a community of peers? I'm going to go through some, I'm not going to go deeply here because I'm going to address some of these, but I want to sort of give you the arc that I'm going to return to. After YOUmedia, really only 1 year after YOUmedia, actually still in the first year of YOUmedia, we were tasked by MacArthur to bring together and to collaborate with other organizations in Chicago to create the Chicago Learning Network, which actually is the forerunner for the HIVE in Chicago. And then Cities of Learning came in 2013. And now we believe we've sort of created an infrastructure that can allow us to turn back to probably our primary question. At that point, it was around digital literacy, but now it's around computational literacy. How do we really now create the programs and the spaces that allow youth to to increase their participation in the computational making space? And so I'm going to dive into some of these in a little more detail to really talk about the infrastructure issues that existed. And so our model across everything that we do has been, this is the DYN ecological approach. We never focus on one place. We move in and out of places as it sees fit. But we always are trying to figure out the connection between schools, after schools, communities, and home. How can we provide kids hooks and triggers for learning such that they're moving across these spaces and bringing what they know in one space into the other space? And our toolbox, if you will, is constantly changing, but it's adults and peers who teach, model, support, and encourage, and we'll speak more about that. Always artifact-based content that interweaves digital and traditional literacies, learning spaces, and most importantly, showcase opportunities. Tech-based learning and community tools. We do a lot of development of tools because we need them at the moment. And then the social practices. You can have technology and people, but if you haven't really figured out the social practices that are unique to each particular environment, then you don't have the glue, or as my colleague from Kansas was telling me, Missouri, if I say Kansas, she's Kansas, Missouri, the connective tissue that's necessary to hold us all together. So first, a little bit on Renaissance Academy. And so the particular question we wanted to answer is, how do we make digital literacies a desired form of social and academic capital that youth are going to put in the work? And the funny story is, this is a school on the south side of Chicago, and what ended up happening towards the end, they couldn't even field a basketball team because the young men, these are African American men, were preferring to spend their time in developing the digital literacies. And so we figured out how to transfer the social capital from basketball to media. And so the model that where we ended up with is this connection of school, where we taught media arts classes, after school, where everyone had to take. It was important that there was a base set of literacy that teachers and everyone could rely on. So everyone had a series of media arts classes. After school was interest-driven, something every day, pick your poison, what you wanted to do. You could be there 5 days a week, you can be there 1 day a week. Home was self-paced, I want to learn on my own. And all of that was supported by a social network remix that provided 24/7 access to each other, for peers, and also the mentors. And the really interesting thing about which we've all seen, and this is this is about 8 years ago, but what we all see now is what the social network provided was an opportunity for 6th graders to connect with 8th graders and for students who are graduated. So it's a community that constantly built. And we would end up with a brother who had graduated as an 11th grader having an argument online about something, a positive argument online with his sister who was a 6th grader. But it created a space, as I think the young ladies from India talked about, a public space for the development and sharing of ideas, but also a space where you've said, hey, if you could do it, I can do it too. And the you could do it was only possible because they can actually see it. And so if we all think about in the spaces we do, how visible is it for kids to see the work of others? Not experts, but the work of their peers that serves as the motivation to say, I can do it. So these are the questions we had to answer to do the work. Really the focus on mentors was really essential for us. And also the development of showcase opportunities. And out of that work, we were fortunate, we were fortunate that MacArthur, and this is actually a really important infrastructure item because oftentimes I don't think it exists. We were a design team, research design, so we are designers and we are researchers, but we were fortunate, but when you're in that space, it's very hard to stop and reflect. And we were fortunate to have our colleagues from Stanford and UIC at that time, Kim Gomez and Bridget Barron, who partnered with us along on the journey, who are research collaborators and partners. And they put in front of us daily, here's what we're learning, here's what we're seeing, so we can adapt. So we were able to adapt our work. And we also had as our goal was how can our kids, if at the end of a period of time, would our kids look any different from kids in Silicon Valley? Could we create the ecosystem such that if you looked at the portfolio of a kid from the south side of Chicago and a kid growing up in Silicon Valley, you wouldn't know who was who? And at the beginning of this, a cohort that we followed for 3 years, at the beginning, 96% of those kids had fewer experiences than the kids from Silicon Valley. At the end, 86, I believe, had more experiences. And really what it came down to, not just breadth, but depth. They had done, not just they had done it once, they had done more things 6 times or more. And that was really huge. And when we talked to the kids and the parents about what is that, it was all about the role models and the support that they had. And if you talk to the kids in Silicon Valley, they also had the same role models, but those were their parents. It normally came from their parents. And in Chicago, it came from the collection of peers and also mentors and teachers and parents. And this work, this is definitely work that is adapted from Bridget Barron, is actually really stood at a core for me when we think about infrastructures, because in talking to our parents of the kids in Chicago, the parents didn't really know that these were roles that they should play. Their role was, let me bring my kids to school, pay their laptop fee, and I trust in the school as the ecosystem that's going to develop them. And our task became after that, and what we've tried to work on through the years, and I think what we're really going to dive into, I think this is our real focus moving forward, is how to help parents understand these roles and how to trigger these roles for them such that they can grow personally the ecosystem for their kids. And just an example of what some of these mean, some are done, audience, I'm looking at your work, I'm encouraging your work, I'm a broker from your work, I'm evaluating your work, these are just different ways in which you can play these, parents can play these roles. And over the years, I want to use this example of this one kid who I think exemplifies when you create an ecosystem that a kid is engaged in home, school, after school, how it can begin to impact and impact their identity. And so Calvin was a young man who, in a traditional school, wasn't the best student, but the after school became his space where he found his own identity, and then he was able to bring it back in. So here's his own words as he talks about his journey. In the 6th grade, well, he called himself a game head, so these are his terms. I'm a game head. But he was talking about how much he would spend time working on this video game. In the 7th grade, he was more playing video games in the 6th grade. In the 7th grade, he still views himself as a game head, but now he's talking about his work. He's like, this is introducing something new. Instead of me just playing somebody else's video game, I can just make my own. The reason why I think this is a big project is because my dream would be to make video games when I grow up. So then in 8th grade, and you know what happens in most places, you're beginning to go, you have to figure out where you want to go to high school. So now you have to sort of say, who am I? What are the schools? And so he's in a different space. And now he's like, okay, I'm still a game head, but now I'm an engineer. And I would want to be the greatest engineer. When I apply for an engineering job, I would say I have had 11 years with working with technology from middle to college. I remember my friends asking, well, why do you want 11 years of technology? I just said, because I just need it. I just want to make a good foundation. So once that foundation is finished, then I can start getting a job. Then one day maybe I will make history. So they understand infrastructure, right? They're beginning to see it. And the beauty now of so many of these kids, Keely and I, we're downtown Chicago, and I think downtown Chicago is now the hangout. We run into almost on a weekly basis someone who was, and we're like, what are you doing? All of them, I think, are doing something technology related. They're like, oh, I'm doing this, I'm communications, I'm video. They're not saying I'm a computer scientist, but somehow the integration and the connection to technology has connected them. And so all of that work is in the book, the Digital Youth Network, which really dives deep into the whole ecosystem for creating that work. And I'll say something else about this later. And the core components that I think from an infrastructure that came out of the work is a framework, the concept of media art classes, signature projects, which are really opportunities to showcase your work, working with mentors. Freedom Fridays is kids-owned, where they would actually say, we're presenting our work and we're leading the dialogue, the social network. And also I really say it was the concept of how, it's not necessarily the research collaborators that's they're key, but it was the way of integrating research and design collectively that students didn't know who was a designer and who was a researcher, right? It was like, well, everyone's here, and let's be open and let's understand what's going on. So, but with this work, I think one of the things we took from it, what we understood is that what we created in the ecosystem, and I, of course, go back to basketball and sports, is we created a space where in any one point in time, you could be spectating, practicing, up. As you're watching, the school became that court in the same way our basketball courts or our football courts or even our music rooms, most places are except for classrooms. Well, all of this can be taking place at one time that would trigger you, can trigger you to do more. And so our goal is how do we take this ecosystem and take it into more places? But we have problems. The problems of that success is when they graduated, they kept coming back. And like, well, why are you back here? You gotta go. They also attended, the way Chicago works, they attended over 15 different schools, high schools. So we couldn't say, let's just follow you into the high school because they went everywhere. And this was the key. They said to us, because we interviewed them, they said, you know what? I'm not doing as much digital media now because it's not valuable where I am. I'm in a school in the 9th grade, I'm trying to be popular. Me showing my video game is not value social capital here. So, and we were able to track, and we saw their production, the amount of productions that they were doing going down. So when we were approached by MacArthur, kind of Yao, to come work and partner with YOUmedia, to think YOUmedia, first I thought they were a little crazy, because when they said, we're going to go create sort of what you've done in a library. In the downtown Chicago, at that point, African-American kids didn't go definitely to the big major library downtown, and they actually really didn't go downtown as much. We were like, we don't know about that, but we worked with our partners in the library and said, let's tackle this. And these were the questions we wanted to ask. How can we ensure students have a space in a community that values and motivates their continued development of digital literacies? Because we're, selfishly, I'm thinking about the kids that we had come up through DYN. But then this is the key question. We said, how can we motivate an African-American youth to travel downtown after school to hang out at the library? So we were very targeted with, that's the population. If we can't figure this out, then we're not successful. And so YOUmedia is a collaboration of multiple different people of the audience, the screen I show later. The design of it is based on the Hamago framework from Mimi. The programming was designed based on the DYN infrastructure. It was a collaboration of the library and the mentors and the librarians, and we're all trying to figure out how do we work together in this type of space. And I'm going to show you a quick video to show you the essence of what YOUmedia is. Some of you might have seen it, but I think instead of words, I think it's best to see the video that'll give you, this is the ecosystem of what existed. And understand, youth are doing this on their own after school.
It was just great to see like all the students come together across medium, work with different mentors, and the work that they've been producing has been amazing.
When I was reading a book, I read the line, "As I live and breathe, a slave by choice." And this picture kind of like embodies self-enslavement.
Actually, was just a dream kind of, to be able to read a book that you wouldn't normally read, and then it has so much of an effect on you that you can put your own musical emphasis on it.
Salted tears dancing and scrapes sting like ringing slaps. They dance to the rhythm you pound into drums.
Skin stretched taut over dismantled jaws and collarbones, we dance to music.
Bright lights, dark days.
I wrote a poem as if I were the character Florence, and so he's gonna be singing he's gonna be singing sort of like lyrics that I wrote. I wrote the poem, and then afterwards there's like a little song, so he's gonna be singing that as well as producing the beat most likely.
Like Master told Mama, it'll hurt at first, but give it time. You will love
the product of the raping. My mama named me Florence, so I wouldn't wither under the harshness of a man. There's a strength in my decrepitness, the freedom of your pedigree couldn't muster.
It's been cool to see how much can come from one book and how like a vast array of work has come from this one book.
Not only are they reading books, but they're making these great projects, these media projects around books. I think the special piece for that for me is that it's something that can be replicated in schools, and I hope literacy teachers take heed and open up the doors of what is possible with students learning this media. Hopefully maybe in the future give them credit in their classrooms for what they're doing in spaces like YOUmedia.
So that was, and I always like to stop on this picture because this is a Mercy, Toni Morrison, and this is a kid. See all the notes? The passion of the conversation and having to support their claims through media motivated the attention into text. So oftentimes when we think about digital media, people think the final product. They don't realize or pay attention to the traditional literacies that were at play. And so YOUmedia provided us with taking what we've done with DYN, where it was really a space where you came in on Thursday and this is in the after school, this is video games, and on Tuesday is graphic design. It was very much structured into a library that has a culture of you can come in and out whenever you want. You don't make a kid sit down for 3 hours at the library. They can get up in the middle of a workshop and leave if they want or not come back. So how do you understand this space? And so we had to think about what students want and what they told us. They want adults who listen to them, mentors who know their stuff. Like, if you can't show me, then hey. Lack of pressure to engage. Again, it's the library. If I come in, don't make me join a workshop. Teen-friendly rules, ability to tinker, access to peers with shared interests, because oftentimes they're coming from schools where our interests are because we go to the same, we're geographically based. Again, teen-only space. And opportunities to earn value showcase, opportunities to showcase the work. And so I struggled with this one, and those who've worked with me on YOUmedia know I struggled with this. The acceptance of sometimes it is okay to chill without creating a chill-only space, right? So you can be there, come every day, but at some point, do you need to engage? But who decides when that point is for you to engage? And I think the beauty of what the library taught us is that because the rules are different, we had to really rethink how youth can be, and it opened up a whole new window to understanding youth, because one day the kid is just sitting there playing video games, the next day they're creating app, the next day they're creating a rap, and so you see different sides and the complexities of youth because they have a space that's theirs, that they control how they make sense of it and use of it. So the problems with this is that one place, it's a big place, can't really support hanging out and geeking out for every interest and every kid. So how do we connect them there but send them out to other places? It was attracting youth, but were we effectively really activating their learning? And how did we know if we were or weren't? And then when we opened up 3 branches, we had this really interesting questions of, well, is it more important that kids have access to mentors with a particular skill set or more access to mentors who they work with over time? So should mentors move across the branches, or should you have a mentor set who stays in a particular location? Really interesting question to explore. And one of the things that really became important, I do not expect you to read this, but data became really important because a kid would come in to YOUmedia, they have a history, they've been other places, but we don't know that. So this young lady came in and was there for a while, then all of a sudden started doing all this photography work. Now, I could easily say YOUmedia made her photographer. No, but if you have the whole history of data, she was part of After School Matters and other things, and that's where she learned her photography, and our job was to access and motivate her to apply that skill set. And so what came out of this, and again, was the role of how you had different mentors who sort of pulled those interests out of kids, and also understanding the different definition of mentorship, because how do we had came in thinking mentors were media mentors, but we had the librarians and the staff, and it's like, well, we're all mentors. So how do we collectively understand ourselves as one team? Because students don't know who's for who and who works where. But back to this slide for a second, what this taught us and where the next work went with the Chicago Learning Network is that YOUmedia can be great, but if we can't figure out how the organizations in Chicago are connected together and how we can move, if a kid, this young lady comes in and wants to do photography, how am I connecting her? Where's the next place? How are we sending her and connecting her to learning opportunities that they're willing to go to as feeling that the only place where they can come and learn is YOUmedia, right? And so I think that's one of the crux. So that led to the Chicago Learning Network, which later led to HIVE. And also led us to understand that we had to figure out the relationship between access and visibility. So how were we going to make visible to kids what opportunities were, but understand what would be the issue that would limit them. So one, information is available about activities is available, but from a kid might be, well, but I lack access, so I can't really participate. So for everything we wanted to do, what were the issues and the questions that we had to figure out and design against? And so 2 years ago, the City of Learning sort of came into existence, and really just came into existence because the work that Mozilla had been leading with badges, and MacArthur and Mozilla have been leading with badges, caught the attention of the mayor of Chicago at a point in time when we were closing schools, and was looking for a way to count, if you will, student learning in summers as a way to counterbalance what was probably going to happen with the largest school closing. And so the mayor's office reached out to MacArthur and reached out to Mozilla and said, well, let's do something called Summer of Learning, which is really a way can we apply digital badges to learning. DYN was brought in as the local partner and collaborator, being on the ground. And it actually, is now a movement that didn't start with the assumption of being a movement. And this is really important because most of these things, YOUmedia, when the YOUmedia expanded to 30, there was never an idea at the beginning of these that what we're trying to do is create something that scale. It was always like, let's solve this local problem in this particular moment. And so really what City of Learning is a place, one, where you can find learning opportunities. Right now in Chicago, there's 5,623 learning opportunities that people can search for. So one place where you can say, what can I do using these particular categories? What can I do face-to-face? And also, what can I do online? That seems simple, but if you think about in your city, if you're a parent, where can you go and say, here's everything that I can do? We were amazed how the reality just didn't exist because we just assumed it did, but it didn't. So that's one thing. And these are all the organizations that exist. But the important part for me about City of Learning has been how it's created conversations, just with the creation of digital badges, has created conversations with organizations to say, hey, you do that, I do that. Oh, why don't we think about doing that together, right? It forces you to say, well, why am I creating something new when something might already exist? And the goal of Cities of Learning is that we can connect people, spaces, and opportunities. And this is just, this isn't a real profile for a kid, but the reality is this should be reality. I'm interested in coding. How do I do online things? What's the summer program I can do? Where are their local meetups? What are my friends doing? How you link all of this together such that on a kid's journey they end up, having done the work on their passion to end up at internships and things like that. But the infrastructure to do something like that is hard. The infrastructure is, of course, we had the badge learning experiences. We had to create and curate learning pathways that Sybil Madison Boyd, who's here, has been leading this. And how do you create learning pathways that go across face-to-face and online? Because the reality is, when you look at the pathway, there's gaps, there's deserts. And so there really aren't pathways in some areas if you're only looking for face-to-face. And really, how do you bridge formal and informal? And one of the most important things to us is supporting parents in curating their child's learning experience, because what keeps us up at night is that we've created a great space that's not going to be used by the students who need it the most. Because if you have to be knowledgeable to access and curate learning experiences, then who's going to benefit from that? So our biggest concern is how do we bring parents along? And of course, it uses badges, but I'll skip through that. And what it's also creating is this new type of ecosystem where it's not just an institution to an institution, but kids are able to go directly to institutions and say, here's what I need. Institutions now are talking to each other to say, okay, how can we collaborate? Institutions can go direct to youth, and youth can actually go direct to each other. So it's really trying to change the systems of exchange and conversations that take place. And finally, it has all of these different, if you think of the infrastructure, it has all of these different types of activities that are necessary. The online, the programs, the pathways, the events, hubs, places where you can go to access. And what we've also discovered this year, which I'll show you in a second, is the need to actually have, using the data, understanding where we have our deserts and how we have to use data differently. So what is also then is brought visibility to some new issues. If I told you, hey, we have over 83,000 students in some way that have been touched by City of Learning, they've claimed an account, they've earned a badge, you would say that's great. But I can also tell you we have over 300,000 youth in Chicago who haven't. And so the existence of City of Learning and the data structures has made it very clear to us who's engaged and who isn't engaged. And so you can't sleep at night knowing 300,000 kids aren't accounted for in the system. So what do we need to do for that? And so it's trying to understand what are their needs, what might they want to do, what are they interested in, what are they involved in, and what are they invested in. And how do we understand, how do we have to be a smart system to do that? So, for instance, in Chicago, we know who they are, where they live, because of our partnerships with the school district, we know who the kids are, where they are, in which zip code they're not in, which grades, and things like that. We're also beginning to, with the team is leading conversations about, well, where should I place my program? And show you that in a second, see if it comes up. It's going to come up, because I'm trying to get through the time. Where should I place my program? Here's where kids live. Here's where programs are, right? And we actually, in the data, we're able to see that there's learning deserts for certain things. Another example of slide. Here's, if we look at zip codes and learning opportunities and look at zip codes based on the socioeconomic status, we see, wait a second, if we want kids to, is our goal in Chicago to make kids sports? That must be, because that's where all our opportunities are. If we really want to be a city that's developing coders and media, then we need to think about what are our opportunities. Now, let me be clear, these are only the opportunities that are in the system. There might be another 5,000 opportunities that we don't know about. But based on what we know, as a smart city and with the working in collaboration with HIVE and others, we're like, how do we then now target some of these areas and say, what should we be doing? How do we begin to think about our collaborations and also our funding differently such that coding goes up? And so one of the things we've been working on, DYN, is saying, okay, well, coding is really where we actually started our work. We actually, 12 years ago, wanted to develop a system, wanted to develop DYN to develop kids' ability to code, but we didn't think the technologies were there at that time. So we now feel we have the infrastructure so we can come back to address this particular question. And so we're trying to think about, well, what are the barriers to continuing participation in the areas of computational literacy? There's the experience gap, lack of confidence, the stereotypes around, particularly, this is girls and students of color, around you don't code. The climate, as we've all seen if you follow any of the news, the climate in the computing environments and computing companies is not necessarily the most friendly. And again, the dearth of role models. So these are all the barriers. So how do we begin to think about creating the infrastructures and the ecosystems to change this? And this work is also, I think, is really out here in California, which is the Jane Margolis work, which has been really instrumental for really highlighting these barriers and helping people understand how to tackle them. And so what we're attempting to do is, like, again, there's not one solution that can solve the problem. I'm sorry, I don't know why I did everything as click, click, click. But first, we're trying to, it's layered. How do we host intro activities? So work with the Chicago Public Schools to do Hour of Code, create a whole series of self-paced online learning opportunities. We have a mobile technology van this summer that's around coding that's going to go around to neighborhoods. I almost think about your, I don't know if those of you had the book on wheels, the library on wheels. Think that, but now with coding that's going to go around to communities that the data tells us are learning deserts, particularly with coding. Establishing, working, we can't do it by ourselves, so Yagochi, one of our team members, Yagochi, has worked with organizations in Chicago who already do computational making that we were able to see in the data to come up with a working group and to say, well, what's common? How do we even have a common set of language? And then how do we collectively provide opportunities? And then for me, it's returning back to the issue of how do we really work with girls to create their digital literacies. And all of this has to be constantly driven by looking at data to say where we need to go, where's the data telling us. And so these are the team members who are working to do the computational making pathway. And I think it's really been a good example of how to make sure that it's collaborative to come up with a shared understanding. I won't necessarily go through that. And our bus. That's not our bus. Our bus, we hopefully when I get off of here, I'll see the screen, I'll see our design for our bus. But we will have a bus. Come visit us this summer. And then I want to dive just real quick into the broadening participation work and really talk about, once you have an infrastructure, how do you then really get back to the question of kids understanding their narratives and how their own narratives can allow them to persist in ways when we know that they're working outside the norm. And so this is an example of, I think 3 years ago when we first started City of Learning the first summer. And our goal, and this is a phrase that Mike said that gave to us as our target. We need to make learning a lifestyle. And it was, how do we connect it through identity? So this young lady had just created, it's an example of her creating e-fashion, her own cuff that represents her and her sharing it. But our goal then is now to say, well, how do we take what we know about how to create great people and spaces with content to figure out where the narrative plays? Because at the end of the day, we know the data tells us for girls that if you don't have an identity connected around STEM in the middle grades, then regardless of how well you do in classes, you're not going to pursue a STEM career in college. So how do we address the narrative? And why this is so critical for me is it goes back to, as Chris, you actually foreshadowed this. When my dissertation work was on teaching kids to read using music lyrics, but it really was about, they also got to create their characters that was on the screen. And one of the tests, the video quality is not going to be great, but this is a young lady who we actually did model the character after. This character, you can barely see her here. This is the first time she's seen the character on screen. And this is what she says. Wait a minute. And so there's a whole thing where she persists and constantly plays this game because she sees a connection. And so one of our challenges in creating this project called Digital Divas, that's teaching girls to do coding and computational making, e-fashion, but through narratives, we have a dilemma though. Previously, we were working with a particular population. Now we're trying to create a set of resources that are going to be available broadly. Well, how do you make it such that everyone can identify and see themselves? And so the question for us is has been the role of narrative. And how do we create these narratives that are representative? These are all sketches. So we initially said, well, can we create something where there's no identity? We tried that, and the girls threw that out. And you're like, no, we don't like that. And because they were still importing their identity on the characters. Then, you know, we've tried multiple different ways, but we've put them in the middle, and they're our co-design partners. And, you know, and they're saying, I want to see myself. And so it's a really interesting process, and we hope that what we're now coming up with is a way in which we have these narratives of multiple different girls, where they're seeing girls tackle and challenge issues around computation that are like them. And this is the second year of that, so we'll see what happens with that. But what we've seen similar is the girl said, well, we're asked, why are you doing this? It's because, well, it's related to the girl in the story. I have to do this because of her, which to me ties all the way back to the work we were doing in the beginning. So in it, our goal has always been to connect, is to figure out the infrastructure that's necessary to connect in and out of school learning, and to understand, because at any point in time where a kid is sitting there in your class or in your environment, they also have other ideas about who it is that they want to be. And so how do we connect it? How do we bring that information back into the school so it can also help and trigger opportunities for teachers? And so I want to come back again to the role of mentors, because we talk a lot about technical infrastructure, but the reality is, at the end of the day, it's all about the human relationships, and how are you enabling your mentors to do what it is that they need to do. And here's a model that supported by HIVE that came out of from Tene Gray, Elsa Rodriguez, who was here somewhere in the house, and Bernadette Sanchez. Their model of mentoring that really tries to look at bringing multiple models of mentoring together to say, how can we provide all of these? And, okay. And one of the things we've done then in thinking about this is the role of mentors, is understanding that you need multiple set of mentors working together. And so for in our work, we've had program mentors who are the people who are connected, like they know you. It's like, you know, we often use high school students and college students as mentors for young people, because they're like, I can be like them. But they might not have your content knowledge, so you have your content mentors. And then oftentimes you need online mentors who might have real expertise, but they can't physically be present with you. Was that a light to tell me to be quiet, or a light just for, okay. Okay, cool, okay. Robert, okay, no, Robert, it's you telling me to be quiet. I know you won't, okay. And this is just an example, again, of how we understand how that plays out. So this is looking at social network data of girls, the divas involved in one summer, and looking at their different interactions with mentors. So the online mentors, they had a lot of interaction with. Not as much interaction online with the program mentors. That's fine, because the program mentors were there with them face to face, right? And so in this one space, they had almost like 12 different adults interacting with them very seamlessly and fluidly, because everyone had a particular role, and the girls got to connect with who they needed to connect with at the time. And so we believe, as we move into more of these blended types of spaces, that as we deepen our understanding of mentors and understand how people play different roles, that we can create that ecosystem and that infrastructure that when anyone's at a fork in the road, they have different opportunities and different people who can step in and provide them the answers. But we also have to have the data systems in place that help us understand this, so we understand if our models and if our things are working. Because we were really surprised at the lack of interaction with our program mentors. We're like, wait a minute, what's going on? Why is this? And then we realized, well, oh, the online mentors are doing all the assessing while the program mentors are still in the program. So by the time they get out of the program, there's not even anything to assess, because it's actually already been done. Again, I'm harping back on the models again. And so we're going to do that. So, and I do want to say, I am going to say this, and then we're going to actually go to questions and answers. The role of the mentors and the role of, for me, the role of being able to partner, and I speak to it about the connected learning community. What's so important to me about this community, and it really takes me back to how when we created DYN, you had me, a researcher, you had Keely, computer scientist, and you had Mike, a poet, all trying to work together. So if you think about who's all here connected in this space, we're all come from very different perspectives, but we're able to understand the different perspectives and figure out how to work together. And that's what connection is about, and to me, that's what the connected learning community is about. So I look forward to connecting and working with everyone moving forward, and we'll speak more about Brother Mike after we do question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Nichole. Nichole, how much time do you need for Brother Mike? How much time do we need? Okay. Claudia, let us know 10 so we can get to Brother Mike. Let's have a seat.
Okay, I'm gonna get my coffee.
I'll get her coffee. So I'm just going to start out with some think alouds, and hopefully we'll have time for you to join this, but we want to also save time for our tribute to Brother Mike. So, wow, I was just thinking about everything everything she was saying was so consequential, and thinking about the mentorship stuff at the end. I was just on a dissertation, one of my students at UCLA, Elizabeth Cardenas Gonzalez, who did a study on distinguishing femtors from mentors from tormentors. Right?
I love that.
So that was good. Excuse me. You were doing connected learning and thinking about these things long before they were even part of the discourse of DML, and it's really instructive to see all this history. You didn't have time to get at some of the challenges, and so I'm wondering, as you're thinking, given your ecological perspective and your interest in supporting youth, what are the challenges in scaling up across neighborhoods and cities so that equity doesn't get diluted? You know, equity is always used, I'm going to do this for these kids, but then equity gets lost in the design and the implementation and certainly in the scale up. Can you just think with us about what those challenges
Well, I think the part of the biggest challenge is scaling too fast before you really know what it is you're scaling. The time to understand if things are contextual to a space or whether they're foundational as principles that need to go across. You can also often only do that when you attempt to go to the next space. So it's a tension between spread and scale, if you will. Second is understanding the context that you're working in and making sure that you have the right partners and collaborators in doing that. I think that's actually been really important. And then understanding that the outcomes, so for the slide about, when I look at some of our students that we worked with for a long period of time, it wasn't the experience, the product that was really the important outcome, is more so the disposition. So their willingness to try new things. And the challenge for us has been, how do we create that context that you're pushing a kid, and I'm gonna say pushing, a kid to be comfortable being the other.
Right.
And how do you do that when you often have walled gardens of where you're working in? And so how do you get outside of your own walls to enable kids to realize that they can be comfortable in other spaces and connecting with others?
I'm thinking back on your Tupac poem and thinking about how you really have designed environments, saturating it with tools and forms of assistance so that all kids could be smart, right? So then you've given us examples, but they're yours and they bring your sensibilities. What makes an ecology equitable? Like, what are those dimensions and those sensibilities that are so vibrantly shown in your work?
See, I know Chris is gonna, we're gonna write a paper on this, Chris. What makes them equitable? To me, it's about, like, and I do go back to the fork. Do youth feel that the options are doable and accessible to them, right? That they're reachable. And that's the importance where badging has been really important to me. It isn't so much about, oh, I have a badge portfolio, but they make visible the milestones along the way. So if you want to become, like we know in sports, like you don't try to become Michael Jordan, or I'll say, for me, it was Cheryl Miller. I'm not trying to become Cheryl Miller at 10, right? Because I can join the basketball team, I can start on that team, JV, high school. So there's all these milestones along the way that monitor and help you know where you are. But if we think in most of the spaces where we're trying to work with kids, it's not clear what those milestones are. And so how do we make sure the milestones are visible and attainable so they're willing to put in the work to get to the next level? Right. And I think if you've made those, and they also have access to the resources and the people that can help get them there. And I think that's, to me, if I think about equitable, is that everyone has a reachable next milestone that is achievable for them.
But then how do we, when you talk about simplifying trajectories and pathways, how do you do it in ways that some people don't say, I'm going to simplify the knowledge base? Oh, no, I'm going to make these reductive. How do you not let people who are not Nichole Pinkard not fall into that trap?
Well, I think I mean, we probably even have fallen into the trap ourselves times. But I think for us, it's been and this I go back to the mentors and really, because we actually are working with people who do the work. And so at the end of the day, if you're trying to produce and create a product, you oftentimes, and a real product, you can't really simplify it. I mean, you got to know how to film, you got to know how to code. So I think because they're real products as opposed to made up products for the sake of trying to understand, do you understand a concept, it doesn't often get simplified because if either you can do it or you can't. Right. And I think by use of real mentors who talk about their process and their history and demonstrate it, I think the kids have been willing to put in the work because they know you have to put in the work to get right. to where they want to go.
Right. I'm going back to, to your stories of soccer, and I know what an athlete you are as well as a computer scientist. So there's a lot of identity work that gets done in these spaces, right? When you're designing. So these issues of race and gender and sexuality and economic and social inequities are implicit, if not always explicit, in the kids' work and in the practices. So what can you tell adults and mentors and teachers about how to negotiate and support the expression and examination of these issues and these identities, this identity work that is so fundamental to youth sustaining in these environments?
See, it's actually an interesting question because you actually, and I don't know if it's good or bad actually, if you look at many of the presentations we do, we actually probably don't talk about race and stuff because we've always been in a context of where we're working with African American kids for the most part. But the issues are prevalent in the projects that they do, right? So it's a lot of social justice issue problems, but they're questioning their environment, and those issues naturally come up. The question for us is, I think when we did a project, when we had a federal grant where we had to work across 5 different communities, and we intentionally chose 5 different diverse communities, that was really enlightening how we had to take a lens on our own work and to realize how much embedded those issues were in the artifacts we were using. Because for one example, we had a record label class, and we're on the south side, and then we're on the west side, and the students can create what they want. One group of students created a mariachi video, and our mentors were like, wait, we've never even seen this before. And of course, it was something different on the south side, which made very clear to us that we needed to be more articulate, if you will, about the issues of race and class and how they were playing out in the design of the content that we were putting in front of kids to trigger their understanding of these particular issues. So we've also tried to be very astute in terms of the creation of our staff and how are we making sure that we're creating people who are representative. Like even now we're about to do this band and we're like, okay, it's coding. So initially the team was like, okay, it's gonna be all men. I'm like, oh no. We cannot go out with a van right. around the city to teach coding that's all men. Okay, let's go back to the drawing board. But oftentimes those subtle things, you can lose them if you don't have, I think, a diverse enough team that actually everyone sees things differently and they can raise the issues up that need to be addressed.
And if they're not part of the design.
Yes, right? A part of the design. I mean, so it's always part, but I think the thing is we always design, and I would say what's interesting about the body of work is, and think about this, if you look at a lot of the images from the DML community, especially early on, many of them African American because they were kids who were involved in this body of work. And we actually had this funny conversation once where someone saying, well, we need images of non-kids of color doing digital work. And I was like, we have succeeded.
Truly disadvantaged.
No, we have succeeded. But in that sense, it's just the space. And so in that sense, we've been afforded, being in the work early on, we've been afforded the opportunity to not position students of color, not position the work as a deficit because they've actually set the model, right? So it's a really interesting space because normally when you come in, it's always like, well, now how do we, it's the opposite, which has been really beneficial.
So one last question. There's the L word is very often not uttered in public spaces. I know when I was doing policy work with Linda Darling Hammond, nobody would ever say the L word, learning. Mm-hmm. Well, you're not just a designer, you're a learning scientist. Mm-hmm. And so how can we get learning and consequential and robust forms of learning to be more part of the discourse of designing these equitable and consequential spaces for youth?
I think it's the data. I think we're now moving much more in a space that we have access to more and more data about learning and what's taking place, and it's the learning, revolution and learning analytics. The dilemma is that you have oftentimes scientists who understand the quantitative methods, and you have learning scientists. It's like, how do we make sure that we have teams that can understand what are the new methods that can actually make much more visible how learning's occurring, or even if my colleague Yagochi has a concept of movement. Like, even before we can look at learning, the outcomes, we have to even see, are kids even making movements,
Yes.
right? And so it's the movements in the, are they clicking on this? Are they even using resources? Like, how are they engaging the content that we've created that we're trying to zero in? Because if we don't even see movement there, we can't even begin to look at, the learning outcomes, because of course we know already there won't be those learning outcomes.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Nichole, for
Thank
this
you.
wonderful conversation. I'm only cutting her off because we do want to make space for this really important tribute. But let's thank Nichole for all she's done.
Oh, I'm thanking myself. Any questions or?
No, go ahead and do it. I'm sorry we aren't going to have audience questions, but I know it's really important to Nichole to do this work, and if we end up, I'll
Okay.
open it back up.
So, I don't know if many of you, if you've been to DML events, and if you're just part of the DML community, the one presence who's been through so much of the work is Brother Mike, and unfortunately, Unfortunately, this December, Mike passed away unexpectedly and left a tremendous gap and hole in our team, in our community, but also I think in the DML work. But we've committed to continuing his spirit and continuing his work, and are fortunate to say, and what we're going to show you next is a video, which is a compilation of Mike's impact in the DML community. But also what my partners in the work, what we've also decided to do is that in the creation of the book, the DYN book, which really is Mike all the way through it, we have 100 copies of the book that we're making available outside as a way of showing tribute to Mike, such that you can see his work and see his spirit in it. And so they're freely available outside, and we ask that they're free, but if you want, you can make a contribution to the Brother Mike Scholarship Fund, which we're pleased to announce that MacArthur Foundation is making a generous contribution. And there will be a scholarship fund at DePaul University where Mike worked, but also where he was a student, to both support students, incoming students who have in their pursuit of college, but also making sure that they're staying connected and giving back through service. But equally with undergrads, it's going to be resources to also support mentors who want to take time to come back and deepen their experience. So we're really grateful to MacArthur and to everyone who's participating in the scholarship fund, so continuing his legacy through that. And so, but the best way to understand Mike and his legacy is actually to see his work and to see him. So here's a composition that was put together.
Do I want to plant seeds in revolutionaries? Do I want to breed revolutionaries who murder all, talk only, read revolutionaries? Those Harvard revolutionaries who pass themselves as master vocabulary but can't read the dictionary making things happen. I give these false prophets a picture of revolution. They only read the caption. All talk, no action.
Thank you, brother. Revolution. I was going to say here, we believe that you guys have the power not only to critique violence, but to come up with some solutions to it, right? So, we try to create environments like this, safe havens, safe spaces, where you ain't got to worry about the mess. Success in YOUmedia is an engaged populace of young people who are creating, not just consuming media, they're producing And I believe that you're starting to see a microcosm of how society should be, that racial, economic lines are broken down in a space like YOUmedia where, people are coming together to express creativity, have a safe space to, share their skills with one another. And you see success when students are, taking it on their own and saying, how can I use this for college? How can I, use this for my career or really engage in my passions?
Your brother got hit by a stone at a home to your friend. Using the start thinking to get your revenge. It's hard to comprehend. The fight in the giant this way, the cycle will never end. Keeping every day getting red, like another in the streets. Like percussion because compound boxes just like no discussion.
Yeah, I would even figure that out, just snaps and then
Yes,
and then just having that vocal by itself.
So without the bass too.
Without anything, just snaps and just let that vocal just carry for a minute.
All right, thanks y'all a lot.
This machine, feel my dreams, revolution right back to me, means, brother Mike, team, I got my team. Little one, boy, we do things, I'm just dropping two steps, who circulating two chains, come right around my side, I'm not sure. Just somebody I think that really loves students. I think having the technical skills is one thing, but being able to, care for students like they were your own in a sense, is something I think we all share here at YOUmedia, that this is a community that we want to see grow. We believe fundamentally that, good mentors, good people are the drivers of that are going to, support students in all the things that they do.
Media, we see you every single day. This poetry, turn the TV off and go read a book. Try out Nichole. It's poetry, Chicago, revolutionary day, and it's war. Everywhere is war. Everywhere is war. Fruit by the door. Everywhere is war. 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 Everywhere is war. And if you spread love, you spread peace, you can stop all wars. Free your mind. Peace out.
One This Way Foundation folks talked about what should be happening outside the arena where Guyana's going to be speaking, where our bus is going to be stationed. I think it's interesting that pop culture can be this place where learning can occur, and we just have to be willing as community members, parents, teachers, mentors, to help guide that learning. And this movement is toward, engaging the community in not monologue, but dialogue. The fact that we can share with each other through art, through music, through activism, through education, a new form of understanding.
I love it. The outside of the bus was completely beautiful, and I just love all the work that you guys have been doing. This just means so much to me, and the focus is on breeding more amazing, wonderful guys like you who want to be involved in transforming culture and inspiring people all over the world to be more loving and accepting. She was positive, she loved our ideas, and
That was just like very powerful. We're all born brave. We want the world to be born brave. That you can, show your creativity, be yourself, and be loved.
Beyond this fallacy, the stars, the black hole, and the galaxy. You are actually mentally, mathematically sweeter than the reality that may play tricks that one can't dream. Fade and make your name in the same plane that Moses saw in the bush high on cocaine, that Jesus
putting young people in the driver's seat to really, in this case, be HBO. Oh man, it was an exciting week of creativity, connected learning, youth bringing their creative ideas to life. That's all we could ask for, to see to have a space where kids are equipped with the tools, the technology that they need, partners who are engaged and connected in a real way to come together to make critical change in their lives as designers, but also to make a better community.
I don't know. Brother Mike sent me some of the images of the work that y'all have already done. You have a trunk show? Yeah?
In particular, at BYU, we want to make learning a lifestyle where it doesn't stop in school, it extends throughout the school day, into the summer, whenever. We're setting a culture again. We're starting a real trend in how we can reimagine what education looks like, what schools could look like. And this space really helped us realize a lot of things. And hopefully, that same realization is there for young people. I see a renaissance of young people creating. I see a renaissance of organizations who are now not thinking in silos, but they're connected and with a purpose. Like when we talk about making, it's just not making just fun. It's making for a purpose. And that purpose is for young people to see that, yes, they can do this.
I just want to thank y'all, one, for just having me out there representing for this beautiful day, this beautiful individual who means so much to me, especially in terms of many of the things Brother talked about, from Black pride to self-empowerment to having control over what we say and what we put out in our community. And as a member of the hip-hop community, I feel like it's more than necessary because we don't have too many leaders out there. I mean, y'all know we don't have too many leaders out there standing up, speaking up, and being heard. The rappers are being heard
Whew. So thank you all, because he definitely was a part of this community. Thank you. We're done.
Thank you so much. Thank you. The spirit of Brother Mike is so tough. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Power comes to the people. Revolution.